A Christmas Story 2. This film came out around 30 years after the original. It's an unnecessary sequel, as a 1994 movie called It Runs in the Family, or My Summer Story, combined a few other stories by the original author, Gene Shepard, along with the Disney Channel original movie, Ollie Hopnill's Haven of Bliss. It Runs in the Family features the same characters played by Charles Grodin, Mary Steenburgen, and Kieran Culkin. It's a wonderful sequel with a lot of funny moments to it and decent production, and was praised for better pacing and characters. They felt Gene Shepard's narration was condescending, but his exaggeration made the first film so charming because it explored Ralphie's imagination, much like the fantasy sequences. Ollie Hopnoodle's Haven of Bliss is kind of a road trip, my summer vacation movie, and came out about halfway between A Christmas Story and It Runs in the Family. As it was, the title It Runs in the Family is so generic sounding that nobody could connect it to the first film, which by that time was a cult classic. The stories of all three Gene Shepard stories are so different, though, that you can't fairly compare them to one another. Apparently, Haven of Bliss was produced by PBS for the American Playhouse series and featured two other stories, The Phantom of the Open Hearth and The Great American 4th of July, and other disasters. However, when you give something the same title and enumerate it, the second story in a series, you're in for trouble, because it will be directly compared to the original. So when the credits start with obvious synthesizer music, I don't feel too positive about what I'm in for. The music was essential to the first film, opening with an instrumental version of Deck the Halls, and in the first scene with the bullies using the themes from Peter and the Wolf. Even in one of the best scenes, they speed up the walk home to show the bullies chasing them, and have some up-tempo chase music playing throughout. So there can be no doubt that music is essential to the storytelling. To be greeted with tinny electronic mediocrity reminds me of the cartoon sound effects that they used in the Growing Pains movies. It was just a hollow betrayal for what was really going to be a schmaltzy, unnecessary nostalgia sequel. Right away, the film fails to even try to live up to It Runs in the Family by not even filming at the house, nor building a replica. Instead, it actually looks like they built or fixed up the most generic house they could find, and for some reason put a white picket fence from Home Depot around it, and hung baskets of flowers along it for a scene in the middle of winter. The narrator, Nat Malden, does a bad impression of Gene Shepard, and it just ends up sounding like Adam West. The writing lacks any of Shepard's flair, which is only a clue to the fact that Shepard didn't even write this, even if it's based on a book by Shepard. The music hardly stops throughout the film, and tries too hard to be part of the scenery. When the first film used music either in the background or in scenes which needed no focus on the dialogue, mostly it just doesn't feel right with it all being synthesized, and the fantasies being too much like someone who watches nostalgia pics but doesn't actually know what it was like living in the post-World War II era. The director, Brian Levin, has given us some of the worst studio films in American history, starting with Problem Child 2, then moving on to Beethoven, The Flintstones, Jingle All the Way, Leave It to Beaver, The Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas, Snow Dogs, Are We There Yet?, Scooby-Doo The Mystery Begins, The Spy Next Door, and Scooby-Doo Curse of the Lake Monster. Up through the 80s, he worked in TV on some okay shows, but each title just seems to be a step further downhill. I honestly feel sorry for the guy because his legacy in entertainment is so unimpressive. Little brother Randy is the first character on screen, and although he is easily approaching 13, is playing a pretend game of Buck Rogers, as he walks out to get the paper in his pajamas. Ralphie, played by Braden LeMasters, looks like an actor with a bad bleach job, whom they just stuck the glasses on. The other sequels didn't have Ralphie blonde, or even wearing glasses, but to tie it into the first film, they gave him a dye job that makes his hair look a little orange. In some scenes he does resemble an older version of Peter Billingsley, the original actor to play Ralphie, but to be fair, in Ollie Hopnoodle's Haven of Bliss, and It Runs in the Family, neither of the actors playing Ralphie looked like Peter Billingsley. The plot revolves around teenage Ralphie wanting a car instead of a BB gun, even though right until the 50s, when young people started fixing up old beat-up cars, a car of your own was still a big luxury, and not a rite of passage like people tend to want to think of it. So there's no reason why this story should even be told, because it wouldn't likely happen, unlike the first film, which took an absurd look at the mundane. Instead, we're forced to look at attempts to recreate the first film. An older Ralphie, the crooked star, and a brief mention of the Battle of the Lamp, which has nothing to do with anything. The dialogue reads like a badly written script, and the lines are telecast by the banal, noodling music. For some reason, the boys are walking down the street in a Midwestern winter as if it's autumn, coats unzipped, no hats, scarves, or gloves. Aside from that, the script basically tries to follow the original scene for scene, which is agonizingly repetitive. But all of the faults that I have cited pale in comparison to the downright disturbing behavior of Ralphie towards his obsession. Her name doesn't matter, because she has a boyfriend, and she and he are both in band, but when they show Ralphie clearly smelling her like a deluded stalker, as far as we know, he's never spoken to her. She's never spoken to him. And yet he is having vivid fantasies of her adoring him, rescuing her, as he stares at her during band practice and bends down to sniff her hair in front of everyone. And yet, nobody calls him out on it at all. He stands there banging cymbals together with a look as though he were pleasuring himself. What the fudge? The fantasies enter the realm of Doug Funny territory, where they aren't even funny compared to the original. Aside from the asexual fantasies involving the object of his obsession, after the main plot device is introduced, raising money to pay for damage to a used car at a car lot, Ralphie decides that they can raise the money by working holiday jobs at the department store, and fantasizes that FDR would give him the Employee of the Year award. By the 1950s, Harry Truman was president and FDR had been dead for some time. Is this supposed to be insights into a mind of a schizophrenic? When he's having these fantasies, does he zone out and go catatonic? Because in the original, he was just daydreaming. The heating repairman is played by C. Ernst Harth, who bears an eerie resemblance to Mike McShane, and I think he was a substitute. Daniel Stern isn't that bad in this film, yet bears no resemblance to Darren McGavin, the father in the original. Nor does his character act exactly the same. In fact, Stern and Stacey Trassis, who plays Mrs. Parker, are two of the best actors in the film, not unlike the parents in the original A Christmas Story. Mr. Parker decides to fish for Christmas dinner, and somehow they're able to get from their home to a frozen lake near a forest at the drop of a hat. Although you can tell it's a set, they don't even bother to add CGI fog breath. Despite bothering with CGI geese on the establishing shot for the lake. This requires a larger suspension of disbelief than most in the audience are ready for. In the opening scene, we see a steel mill far behind the house, but there's a pine-hedged lake close enough for a housewife to walk to, or Ralphie to ride his bike to. An allusion to the pink rabbit suit, Ralphie has to dress as a reindeer and suffers both embarrassment and assault. The Christmas present scene is nice enough once you accept that this film is totally mediocre. In the end, Ralphie gets the car, which is a big leap to make, and of course his obsession comes to see him, and the dialogue is almost natural, although the direction of the conversation is way too convenient for the plot. Why is she interested in him exactly? There is no reasoning for it. The film has a disappointing start, but a quasi-satisfying conclusion. It's still a poor comparison to the original.